All right. Let me make sure everything is set up. Hello, Matthew.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. Here, let me share my game with you so you can see. Um, all right. I'm going to make sure everything is all set up and good to go. Welcome to the 0 viewers of this
Yeah,
stream.
I'm not watching this week. I'm just chatting.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. It's just funny. Oh gosh, it's Monday and I've already worked for 3 hours and it's just my brain's exploding. So welcome to
Have
Fan
you
Game
got?
Follies.
Sorry.
Oh
Have you
no,
got coffee?
I already had one. See, but I'm saving up for my second coffee. I'm doling it out
Good,
meticulously throughout
because
the day because I've got a class from 4 to 7 tonight. So I like need to space out the coffee.
you can't have too much coffee. You can't have. Yeah, because if you have too much coffee earlier in the day, then you can't really have it later.
Yeah, and I like the jitters will happen and then a crash will happen.
Yeah, totally.
And this conversation works in well with what we're going to be talking about today, which is the evils of capitalism, um, and how I have to drink coffee just to survive it. Um,
You're spoiling me, David, with all of this.
it's really reading through like the inspiration for this game was actually really interesting to me because the genres are so different. But anyway, I'm going to quickly read the land acknowledgement, and then we'll get started. So we acknowledge that in Milwaukee, we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. All right, let me turn on the sound for the game so we can hear it in the background a little bit on the stream. Cool. Let's get going. So this is where I stopped last time. I have no remembrance of what's going on, but that's okay. So how are you doing today, Matthew?
Well, I too have also been working all morning, but doing nothing fun. Compulsory online trainings. I had a little issue at the bank this morning.
Uh-oh.
But I think I should be able to. Now I just have to. I have to do my own things, my own class now. I did some grading, all that sort of good stuff. But I mean, there was a man coughing next to me in the swimming pool changing room just now. Not a fan
Great.
of that. Not
a fan of that. I went to the center for the first time on Sunday. The workout facility and everything, and I get kind of nervous because I'm not athletic at all, so I feel kind of like a poser going in there. But
No, the posers are the people who go to the gym who are already fit.
that's a good perspective to have.
Yeah, taking up all the space.
Yeah, it's like I'm the one that needs to lose weight, not you guys.
I don't, you know, I wouldn't, I
shouldn't say need, but
make that statement, you know, I think, but, you know, these people at the gym with their muscles, who do they think they are? Honestly, it's a form of capital, isn't it?
It is. That lends well to what we're talking about. So what I was doing a little bit of research about this game. Oh, key. Last night, and so it's based off of this game from the Atari, like the original Atari, called Mule, M.U.L.E. And basically, it's kind of like I don't know if you want to call it an economic simulator, or how you want to talk about it, but like basically what it is you you play against 4 other people, either computer players or human players, depending on how many people you have, and you take on like the guise of one alien colony that's trying to kind of take all the resources, and there are 4 different resources that you guys like kind of compete over that form the economy of the game. And you also have some randomly I mean, if you want to call them randomly generated, I'm not sure if they're like truly RNG or not, but random events that happen in the game that almost kind of Mario Party style is what it reminds me of, where the player in the lead usually get like unsatisfactory events happen to them, so they lose some random event makes them lose some of their capital or whatever, and then the person in the lowest usually gets good events happening to them to keep things interesting, and to keep the gameplay from just becoming completely one-sided the whole time. But to me, I don't know too much about the original game, but to me it's just interesting that that game then goes on to inspire an action-adventure game, which
Yes.
which often has a completely different relationship to organization and capital and that stuff. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like the difference of how the two genres approach capital.
I have further questions.
Of course.
Is the original game told from the perspective of these sorts of recalcitrant eco-natives?
No, so I think what it is basically it's almost kind of like Dune, and that it's like Dune minus the natives. Basically, it's like you all kind of go onto this planet and none of you originally live there. It's just all about like amassing as many resources as possible. And I don't think it really has. I mean, because it's an Atari game, and also just because I don't think it was part of the intent of the creator. It doesn't really have any explicit critiques of capitalism, beyond the setup of it, which you could then argue is a critique of capitalism. But
well, immediately, David, it brings to mind a publication by Joseph Dumit at the University of California, Davis, which you'll enjoy because it is a STS research into pedagogy. And the abstract reads, game design offers a powerful pedagogical paradigm for engaging students in thinking and researching socio-technical systems. Using the example of designing a game around fracking, this paper describes how game design grapples with emergent dynamic processes and how students are drawn into becoming STS researchers. And so what I wanted to, when you said about the players in that game being in the position of needing to accumulate as much as possible, I'm just skimming here for... So what the game they made was they were trying to put the player in the perspective of being a corporation.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, totally. Just trying to find a good description here. So they would, and their goal was to try and extract as much resources as possible before the world ends, right? And what they had to do was come up with the different mechanics that a corporation, player, the CP, might use in order to... So here we go. In asking the students to design a game in which the players would be fracking companies, I was asking them to step into the point of view of a company, to map the world that they live in, to figure out what corporations care about. Precisely by taking on the POV of a company and asking, how could I influence this to make it friendlier to my goals, they began to see the news as intervening in the world rather than reporting on it. They could then read and understand Weiler's STS query, why are former Mai Tai head Moni's supportive statements, framed as policy recommendations and not advocacy. Okay, this is technical, but basically, by stepping into the point of view of a corporation, right, they were able to come to conclusions. Let's just see what some of those conclusions were. In which they realized that corporations live in a different world than we do, and from their point of view, basically all of the things that we would see as evil and disastrous and disgusting are legitimate, right? From you'll love this last paragraph. By ignoring the serious play of games, the social sciences have left this rich terrain for teaching and analysis in the hands of economics and consumer culture. Game design is an under-examined and often ignored aspect of systems thinking and engagement with which the social sciences would do well to experiment. Psychologically, the serious play of designing a game seems to free our imagination to attempt to embody a complex, dynamic, socio-technical system. Importantly, the game does not have to be finished to be useful. Collectively workshopping a game idea provides a format. Well, this is veering off. What I want to do is find this, the conclusions. But basically, yeah, by putting these players in the perspective of extractivist corporations, right? And especially if the game is well designed, right? You very quickly get them thinking in a sort of ethical sphere, right? Sometimes radically different from your own. For example, when my wife and I play Monopoly, Lucy becomes a very different person.
Totally.
So here we go. Trying to see all events from a corporate POV often produced a type of epistemological whiplash. Students came to understand how it could be that the ways in which something they found awful also made sense, that disasters were normal, in Kim Fortune's terms, that the destruction of the environment was an emergent outcome of the current relations of production. Their analysis of the grey literature made clear that companies and citizens often do not share worlds. In the sense that they do not care about or even notice the same things. The actor networks that each make up are not the same. The actor networks that each makes up are not the same. This led to a deep discussion about multiple worlds and ontologies, concepts that the students were able to wrestle with because they helped them think through the game that they were making.
So was this the game that they themselves were creating, or does he mean game they were making as in like they were like the play that emerged from them playing the game?
This paper is written from the perspective of game design as a classroom tool.
Gotcha.
But I think it works very well for thinking about economic simulators that position users as players in a gameful process, right?
Yeah.
Where you also take on, and we could even operationalize this concept of actor network, right? In thinking about in an economic simulator, what are the actants by which players accomplish the goals of that game, right?
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to our discussion of constraints that we had last week in terms of creating the artifacts of this game.
Yeah.
And so you could sort of see there's sort of like a Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings relationship between, I guess, these two games, and that you have an economic simulator on the one hand, but here we have a sort of narrative-driven action-adventure game like you were talking about.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting... Oh, sorry.
No, I wasn't going to say anything more.
Oh, I thought you... I think what's interesting then, too, right, because this game is more, like, narratively focused on being like, hey, environmentalism and colonization and all that stuff is bad, right? Like, they're taking over the Wampus people, which are, like, the home... Like, this is their territory, or their home, right? I wonder, then, is that a different... I mean, obviously it's different, but I'm wondering how it's different from an approach of not giving that narrative, but having that play within a system where you yourself can then go about doing those things, right? Of like hoarding resources and all that kind of stuff. Does that give players a different understanding of how this system works, rather than a narrative of it? It sounded like that paper was more interested in like structures and systems rather than narratives.
Well, that's true.
So I just wonder how they're different, how people engage with them differently.
I suppose. I mean, so the claim is that this game is another window into the same world as the other game, the original.
That's the intention of the game designer. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's helpful.
This is John Vanderhoff, who created these games. He calls it the Muleniverse, and the five games that he has made in this Muleniverse are all based off of the original Mule game. And so like some of the evil characters, or I shouldn't say evil characters, some of the creatures that we're fighting are designs like taken from the original Mule game, because the Mule game was ported to the NES, and so he used some of the assets from that game as like the creatures that you fight in this game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me think. I mean, is this an example of intermediation? Maybe not. It's more nuanced than that. It's just the same system, the same game, but told from a different genre, you know, in the way that. And so this sort of keeps our discussion within narrative terms, but game narrative terms, right? In which, you know, the tools of the game designer are the ways that they tell a story within the same world, and also technological system used to render it as the original games, I guess. Although,
yeah.
So,
yeah. So to me, it's interesting how you have two games that are like functionally, or gameplay wise, or however you want to call it, very different, trying to tell a similar story within the same world. Right, but they're also created 30 years apart through very different methods, and very different, you know, historical and positions and all that stuff. So I just found it interesting that like,
yeah, no,
rather,
it is.
what I was just gonna say is maybe some of the future games in this Mule-niverse collection are like more like economic sims, but I was just surprised that, you know, the first decision to like expand upon the universe is to make it an action adventure game, kind of like this, that often are criticized for, I should say criticized like intellectually for being encouraging like colonialist viewpoints of the world.
Because the main characters and the narratives of what action adventure games are often colonial, or sort of venerating or validating that sort of kind of worldview. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing that stands out to me then is to think, well, if in this game we are invited to take on the embodied perspective of this
evil cat
creature, bombs, then what is the perspective of the original Atari games? Who exactly are we playing when we play Capital, you know? Because it sort of goes with other, sometimes they're called God games, you know, like where you don't play really an individual, you play a historical development of a system or a faction.
Yeah, something. Are you referring to something like Civilization?
Well, it's complicated because you have sort of like this eternal leader kind of personification, right? Where for 2,000 years each nation is ruled by one person, right? George Washington, Boudica, whatever. But it's interesting to think then about the perspective, the POV, the economic simulators ask you to take on, because are these not essentially the perspectives of capital? And it's interesting to try and imagine then, because, you know, in contrast to like, well, this game where your agency is embodied in your WASD limbs, right, and your ability to move the sprite around and stuff. What is the agency of capital, and what are the affordances of that agency? You know, what does it mean to what is it more of a fantastic claim, right? What sounds more fantastic to you? The claim that you are an alien when that agency is similarly embodied to the kind that you have, or the claim that you are capital, right? Even if the system in which you are capital is inherently recognizable as extractivist and colonial and etc. You know, which feels more at home?
Well, and it's weird because, right, for basically all intents and purposes, the in the original game, you play from like a top down, almost kind of like a board game perspective, where you're not actually like moving a character around, right? You're just like engaging in the system by laying pieces down, and all this stuff. So like in a sense, you are like technically embodying this alien race, but really you're in the game itself, you're not physically embodying them. So you could say, if you want to, that you're embodying like the capitalist eye, right, of organization and all that stuff. Sorry, I'm trying to beat this cat king thing, so I'm not.
You beat the cat. I'm gonna make a cup of coffee and I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Go for it. Ooh, this cat's gonna get me. I hope he's like the final boss, because I'm a little... I'm struggling a little bit here. There we go. Alright, come on. I'm just attacking with, like, all my might. There we go. No, I just gotta get rid of this guy. Sweet. Whew, it's too early on a Monday morning. There we go. Cool. Sweet. Alright, there we are. The eels may taste delicious, but their venom packs a mighty wallop. Darn it, I was hoping that would be kind of the main final boss, but here we are. I mean, the comparisons to Zelda here are pretty straightforward with this kind of game. It is interesting where you have the narrative of this colonial thing happening, because in the original Zelda, right, there really is no narrative as to why you as Link are like engaging in your environment, right? It's more so just like, hey, this is Hyrule, so you should kill everything here, or at least, you know, defeat Ganon, who's the root of all evil. So I don't know, it's just interesting how, as a character, you are designed, or you're narratively engaged in a narrative that usually was not typical of the era. I feel like that changes things. I don't know.
What year is this?
Let me go double check. Good thing I have the link to the game in the chat. Let's see if there's a publication year. I believe it was 2015, but I want to make sure.
Need to grind some of my my coffee beans, you know, which we could also think of as purple gemstones that have been extracted from a distant moon, and which the Empire of Capital have had to slaughter the alien natives of that moon in order to bring those gemstones back to our galactic empire for my consumption.
Yeah. It's just instead of the moon, you know, it's Puerto Rico or
Nicaragua
or Hawaii, you know. I believe it was 2015, but I can't really find the actual date. I know Wampus was the first one that he had created. I'm not too sure of the date, but yeah. But yeah, I was just kind of mumbling to myself, but right, the most prominent action-adventure game on the NES is obviously Legend of Zelda, and in that game, right, there's no really narrative explanation as to why you're going to save the princess and get the Triforce, right? But like, it's interesting how the monsters themselves are positioned in this world. they're like given names and given traits and all these things. And a lot of them are drawing from their descriptions as alien races in Mule. Still, I don't know, it's just interesting. Head empty, many thoughts. Ooh, worms. So it looks like I have come upon not a communist faction. Not a communist faction, but a faction that wants to gain their independence back from all these aliens coming to steal their home.
Evil. Evil. Why did these others have to get in the way of progress? That's my question.
Why can't you just let them mine all of our resources? Yeah, so these guys are all interested in getting the settlers out of here. Oh. Okay. So they're just like, hey, we're resistance people. Okay, I guess that's it. I'll continue on in the game. Oh gosh. It'd be cool if those rocks exploded. Cool.
Okay. I'm also I'm just gearing up to write a summary for a class I have tomorrow. But I don't have any time tomorrow to write the summary. And then the thing I have due today I wrote yesterday. This is what it means to be a responsible adult.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's better than not getting them done. Do you have do you have classes where you have to like write a reading response every week, or?
So we have an online forum, and I need to post a question and then reply to a question, and then every week before class I have to summarize the readings, which are graded, so, and of course I'm a little bitch when it comes to, I want to have the highest score, I want to win. Okay, I'm a teacher's pet, that's just the way it is. I've accepted it.
That's not very communist of you.
Well, the thing about I don't have to be the pinnacle example of. I don't have to be the Stakhanovite example of the ideology. I just have to advocate for it. Passively from the safety of the institution. I'm not gonna offer a police officer a can of Pepsi anytime soon, David.
No. Good. I would hope it would be Coke,
Oh, of course.
Apparently I'm on like a racetrack. I'm not really sure why, but I am. Yeah, so labor in grad school is
this is sort of, you're like the guy in Iron Man 2 just now on the racetrack, You're subverting the spectacle of the society.
Mm-hmm. And I'm creating my own spectacle.
Yes, by being a disruptive anarcho agent.
See, and that's how I would want to be if when I do D&D. Like, I would want to be like that trickster archetype. I just think it's so much more fun and so much more interesting. Trying to break the system almost.
I am a chaotic force as a player, unfortunately, because firstly, I'm an asshole. Secondly, I like to provoke the dungeon master and disrupt their plans, as well as the other players. Because otherwise, it gets stayed. You need these chaotic agents, right? And it's the sign of a good game master, I would say, if they can sort of harness that chaotic energy,
See, and I think I I try to be so nice and follow so many of the rules in real life that for me it's like when I do a game, I'm like I kind of want to be the sneaky one. I mean, because I'm goody two shoes, you know.
You the nasty dialogue options, or are you too pure-hearted that even within dialogue trees you can't help?
No, well, it depends on the game I'm playing. So, like, if I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I'm deliberately being mean to all the rich people, and I'm deliberately being nice to all, like, the poor people, but I also, like, want to get raunchy with everyone in the game. So, you know how that goes. Because games, if you want to say about, you know, experiencing different identities, which is kind of cheesy, right? But I do think it's interesting for me to think through of how I play a game. Is I'm like I always kind of want to be the tricky one, because in real life I'm always like feel like I need to be so sincere all the time.
You're a teacher.
I am a teacher. It's true. Secretly underneath it all, we all just want to. Oh, I died.
We all just want to subvert. Well, you know, but that's not. Let's think about that through like structural Marxism for a second, okay?
Okay.
Because the roles that we perform within the institutions, right? Those institutions are always interpolating, to use Louis Althusser's term.
They're hailing us.
They're hailing us, yeah, and we're being violently shaped by our participation within these systems of ideology. And so, you know, think about us as we're infinite energy. We could be anything, but we're shaped, you know, like when you put a cake mixture into a muffin tray, you know, and that's, you know, over time, you know, that does create strain. And so the idea that you can, you know, step out of those interpolated roles, right, and be something else, you know, is interesting from a capital, you know, if you're critical of capital and the way that it, you know, breaks our back so that we fit the mold, you know, then games are an interesting extension of that. But like we came upon last week, to what degree do games allow us to realize an ego beyond capital? And to what degree are those egos that are marketed to us as distinct games, right, simply an extension of those institutions?
Yeah. Right. Because marketing the identity as being able to assume another identity can also then be used to like reify capitalism, right? Because if you're under capitalism, you can experience different identities, then you don't need to rebel against it, right? Even though it crushes your like main identity or whatever you want to call it down, right? If you're then able to experience pleasure, but it's still underneath capitalism, that way the system maintains itself by giving you like maybe 1 inch when we need like 50 million miles, right?
Well, you know, the principle is that capital never relents, and it never gives you anything, never gives anything that you need to demand and take, right? Everything that capital, you know, gives. And yes, the ways in which, especially in response to crisis, the way that capital reshapes itself. And, you know, I understand that much like the economic simulator game, I am in a way reifying or animating capital, right? Mm-hmm. Is capital an animus? You know, does it have a life? What is the thing that we think is animate about capital, that it's able to, like a chimera, always reshape itself in order to keep it? Like a maze, right? It's like a maze, and every time we try to get out of it, we find that it has reshaped the corridors so that no one plan works more than once. And the only way we can get out of the maze is either by sheer luck or violent revolution of the underclass.
See, that's something that's always interesting to me about games, and I think how do you right, because so much of it is about a collective revolution, right? It
Yeah.
cannot be a leader, assuming government and then somehow like leading people. I mean, you can have leaders within the movement, obviously, right? But the whole idea of it is that you don't have like one main leader dictating what everyone in the organization or the revolution does, right? You have leading principles, but you're not subservient to an individual, right? You are part and you're part of a group. But when it comes to games, how do you get, if you want people to be able to embody the spirit of like a group revolution, how do you do that when so much of games is about assuming one identity and becoming like the master of an environment to overtake it to like save everyone else, when like what we need for capitalism to be taken asunder, right, is a cultural mass revolution. I'm not saying games need to do that, but I'm saying like, how do we get people to envision how to, I don't want to say inhabit a group mentality, but like, how can games do something other than just like reinforce an individualistic take to these issues, I guess?
Well, let me just refer to the. So there was a tweet by James F. Purini after the GameStop
Scandal. Which is Wall Street clearly underestimated a generation raised on highly coordinated Friday night World of Warcraft raids.
And I think this is interesting here if we're talking about the ways in which because the content, so games are always about uncertain outcomes and sort of I don't have the easy vocabulary here that others do. Games are always about controlling uncertainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you have games in which the emergent play cannot be contained and has unexpected outcomes. And so our question here is about how the and it's quite funny actually that what looked like you were running through not a circus so much before as a chariot, the word,
Like a coliseum kind of place.
yes, a coliseum, but also chariot. It's called a Circus Maximus.
Yeah.
And talking about bread and circuses, right? We could think about ourselves as this protagonist here in this game, because what you're saying is, how can we subvert, right, the institutional aims of the Circus Maximus, right? Bread and circus and all of that kind of thing, right? In which you have not only a spectacle where everyone's gaze is on one position, but you have there a game being watched in which anything can happen, right? How do we then subvert that and change it, right? Or will it always be like that maze that's always being reformed, right? Can we ever plan it to happen, or will it always be unintended consequences, right, that break the capitalist system, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why so many socialist revolutions begin with things that could never have been foreseen. Like I mentioned, what was it, Nicaragua before?
Mm-hmm.
Was the country that the Iran-Contra scandal was centered around.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nicaraguan Contras were conservative landowners who wanted to win back the city, which had fallen from revolution. But that revolution only began because of an earthquake. Did you know that?
I didn't know. So you mean like the earthquake, did it like emphasize existing like social, like economic class, or
So in 1972, an earthquake rocked Managua, Nicaragua's capital, and Somoza, who was the president and son of the previous ruler, exercised emergency powers to deal with the earthquake. And while he and his colleagues stole a majority of international aid sent to Nicaragua in the earthquake's wake. So in reaction to this is how people got angry. And actually, there was a particular event around a policeman. But basically, when we look at the major socialist movements, right, that have disrupted the capital empire of the late 20th century, they've always begun from completely unpredicted things, right? Here's the Circus Maximus again. And so my question is, and GameStop, to what degree was GameStop a completely unexpected consequence? And so the thing what's so interesting about games when it comes to control, right, is it's sort of like, if we think about a bureaucratic totalitarian regime, right, the way to defy the regime is simply not to follow the very precise rules of that regime, and it's often something which is sort of poked fun at by certain, like, you think about those VO5 adverts, right, where people like have hair gel, right, and everybody's shocked at their looks, or the famous Apple advert where everybody's like, all the PC users are droning at a screen, and then this beautiful athletic woman, right, ironically a symbol of Soviet communism, right, runs in and throws a hammer at the screen. And so what I'm gearing up to is the ways in which this relationship to uncertainty in games and the governmental position of the game designer or the game master, right, is the metaphor for governance in our times, because now it is about as things are getting more unpredictable, right? Basically, everyone's shitting themselves because, if it took an earthquake, right, for the Nicaraguans to revolt against imperialism, right? Well, what's going to happen when global warming accelerates the degree to which the Earth basically is having all of these unpredictable events, right? Or when other things do similar things, and all of these things that nobody can predict, right? And then how do you respond to them? How do you react? And how do you maintain the status quo, right? Maintaining the status quo gets very difficult when unpredictable shit keeps happening. And so to go back to your original question about the role of games in revolutionary praxis, right?
Yeah.
Games like the Friday Night World of Warcraft raids actually, I think, can play a role in having people lean into uncertainty, right? Because if the revolution is going to happen, it's never going to be planned. It's going to be a spur of the moment opportunity to score the goal, right? To see the gap, to go for it. And it's through games that people hone those sorts of tools, techniques, abilities. Just like, and also let's not forget that in order to play with others online with a game, you often need Discord or other digital infrastructures to coordinate your actions, your movements, your positions, your timings, right? And all you have to do is, if you take the game away, what you have there is already an established infrastructure for the kinds of coordinated attacks on capital, like the GameStop dump was. Was it a dump? What's the particular name?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Let me see. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I was thinking too, like the randomness that you're talking about, then can game? So I'm thinking back to the original Mule, in which random events would occur based on like people's positions in the game.
RNG.
And you said, right, that part of what's necessary, or maybe part of the way that revolutions take place is through randomness, almost, right? Random events that happen at just the right moment in time. I wonder then how something like a D&D or something like a Mule, which incorporates either through the direct narrative force of the Dungeon Master or through the programming of a video game developer, can that train people or
may I add a third category?
Yeah, of course.
Through the programming, but also narrative force of an XLDM. Anyway, can it train? You're saying, can it train?
Yeah, or can it at least? I don't know if train's the right term, but produce a system of responding to these random events in a productive, not productive as in capitalistic productive, but maybe effective is more of the term I'm looking for. I don't know.
I am now leafing through my copy of Elaine Badge. Because I'm looking for a discussion about imminence and communism. Because for Badiou, communism or a communist disposition is always imminent in every moment. Because power is always imminent in every moment. Or rather, power is explicit. And what I mean by that is, if the battlefield, right, in which these are played out, are social and in the way that we enact relations, right? Then the communist ideal is eminently realized through a kind of role-playing. And so if you are able to, in that role-playing, can inform social interaction or technical interaction, right, with machines, or with people through machines. But ultimately, it is there for you to perform. And it's and it's nothing more than that. And so if you can predispose people to be more readily aware and ready to perform a certain kind of mode of engagement, right? Then you can have people who are going to be more socially, I think, successful.
Yeah, and I think
that's very Jordan Petersonian, maybe.
Yeah, but we mean it in a good way.
Yes.
That makes me think too, especially because I think games, if we want to think of the capitalist system, or like the network of operations that support and all that stuff of the capitalist system, I feel like games are one of the few, I don't want to say entertainment because that's not what I mean, but the few mediated experiences in which people engage directly, or at the very least we can say they respond to complex systems that they are not themselves part of making. And I feel like that has some reflection in our relationship to capital in some ways, in which we're all playing our roles within this system that we cannot fully understand exactly how it's all entirely operating, but we have to be responsive to that system nonetheless. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it more metaphorically than actually like anything else, but That's just
No,
something
no.
that's been going through my head.
I found. Let me see. Let me see. So no, we are performing roles in networks of capital beyond our control and beyond our fullmost comprehension, right?
Yes.
But who does have that level of comprehension, right? Or no, nobody can. Um. So okay, so let's have a look. So
Well, and I think we could argue that in the game design process too, especially with like larger games now, right? There aren't even the people that are making the systems now. They're so intricately complex and require so many people that even a game designer or an executive producer, whoever, does not fully understand how the system works either. Anyway.
yeah, of course. And so, in Baju's chapter, the idea of communism, from the communist hypothesis from page 180 or 179. This is when I started to underline stuff. So, he's talking about event and about how event is a kind of, because event has been thought of before in a transcendental kind of sense, but event and imminence is interesting because it brings it down to earth, quite literally. And so, a truth procedure. Let's see. The real exists. Okay, so you're talking about the real in a given world, and under very specific conditions that I'll come back to later. However, as Lacan said over and over, it is unsymbolizable. So the real of a truth procedure cannot be really projected into a narrative. Blah blah blah. No, let's keep going. The communist idea is the imaginary operation whereby an individual subjectification projects a fragment of the political real into the symbolic narrative of a history. It is in the sense that one may appropriately say that the idea is ideological. Okay, well that doesn't really make sense. Let's keep going. Only political sequences that it would ultimately be absurd to label as communist can be recovered by the communist idea as the potential force of becoming subject. So the becoming subject of individuals, what does that mean? That's role-playing, baby.
Yeah.
So he says here, here's a footnote. To live as a subject can be taken in two ways. The first is like to live as an immortal, a maxim translated by Aristotle. As means as if one were, right? To live as if one were immortal. The second way is topological. Incorporation, in effect, means that the topological is in your networks of capital. Incorporation, in effect, means that the individual lives in the subject body of a truth. These nuances are clarified by the theory of the body of truth on which logical was concluded. And then he goes off into more footnote stuff. But basically, this sort of notion of performing capital versus performing communism, right? And understanding in what ways, we're able to make the distinction. And always imminent in the moment is our ability to step outside of history, right? And live as if we are immortal. And all of this sort of French jargon, right, doesn't help things. But then he talks about the event, which he says, I call an event a rupture in the normal order of bodies and languages as it exists for any particular situation. What is important to note here is that an event is not the realization of a possibility that resides within the situation, right? Or that is dependent on the transcendental laws of the world. An event is the creation of new possibilities. It is located not merely at the level of objective possibilities, but at the level of the possibility of possibilities. Another way of putting this is, with respect to a situation or a world, an event paves the way for the possibility of what? From the limited perspective of the makeup of this situation or the legality of this world is strictly impossible. So without that that grammatical sort of middle part there, an event paves the way for the possibility of what is strictly impossible, right? And so if we keep in mind here that for Lacan, the real equals the impossible, the intrinsically real aspect of the event will be readily seen. And so he calls the state, right? The state of the situation, the system of constraints that limit the possibility of possibilities, right? And so that is the game designer. Because the game designer, in order to create play, right, in a way that is replicable, or recurring every time, and that's what we call a game, right? Like if you play something and every time it has the same shape of outcome or the same shape of process, that's the game, right?
Yeah.
And that is the state as well for Alain Badiou. The state is always the finitude of possibility, and the event is its infinitization, right? So when he's talking about this kind of impossibilism, right, and basically doing something that's not allowed, that nobody thought was possible, right? That's really what the communist ethic here is for Badiou. And he actually, oh, how about this? He actually mentions Althusser and ideological state apparatuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for example, what is the state comprised of today with regard to its political possibilities? Well, the capitalist economy, the constitutional form of government, the laws concerning property and inheritance, the army, the police. Through all these systems, all these apparatuses, including, of course, those that Althusser called the ideological state apparatuses, which could be defined by their one common goal, David: preventing the communist idea from designating a possibility. Right? So you can see how the state organizes and maintains, often by force, the distinction between what is possible and what isn't. It follows clearly from this that an event is something that can occur only to the extent that it is subtracted from the power of the state.
So basically, the event is something kind of that the state itself deems as an impossible thing to occur, but it occurs and therefore takes away from that power of the state, if I'm interpreting this correctly.
Exactly. So think about what we were saying before about unpredictable events and how those are usually the catalyst of communist ideas, because they create a space in which, well, they are events, right?
Mm-hmm.
In which new possibilities arise, often by necessity. And so basically, it's interesting to overlay this kind of notion of communism, the state, power, practice, with the agency of players and the the structural violence inherent in game design.
Breaking the system.
Producing the system, right? And then having people be shaped by its processes, right? And sort of like, well, when we think about things like modding, when we think about things like cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are, in essence, the creation of impossibilities. When
they're events.
They're events, right? And so it's interesting then to think about the Wall Street Bets dump in the aftermath of that, because then you had like Robinhood freezing accounts, and you had this whole institutional organization, right, to basically make what everybody saw happen impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's the interesting thing is when an event occurs and an impossible thing happens, and then they change the rules so that that impossible thing stays impossible.
It also right, if we think of how, if we want to argue capitalism, or at least the structures of capitalism, if you want to give it the agency to people and stuff, capitalism, that's not the point right now, right? But if we want to say like capitalism is flexible, right, in maintaining hierarchy, is it possible then that if an impossible event occurs, that then capitalism, or the actors within a capitalist system, can then redefine that event as something that is possible within the system, therefore like taking away some of the potential like critical revolutionary potential of that act?
Yes, of course, we see it happen all the time.
And that kind of reminds me of the
We
Carnival-esque.
With We see it, for example, with LGBT politics.
Oh yeah.
What once a threat to socio-normative hierarchy has now been reproduced as an extension of it.
And not even in just like the heteronormative way or the homonormative way, but in the very concept of identity in the first place, and how identity is now, I shouldn't say is now because I'm not making a historical argument, but identity, right, as a method and a tool of existing within the world for LGBTQ people now becomes the norm. And it becomes an identity marker and not a social group category in the sense of a revolutionary aspect, right? You're able to individually target LGBTQ people with all of these divisions now.
That's right. And so, the sad thing is then that form of politics is inherently friendly to corporate capital rather than critical or aggressive towards it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, prime example is just pride parades. Like, that's a very easy example, but like it's just one of them.
Yeah, it's a spectacle, right? And
Yeah.
in which there are a lot of public symbols.
Yep.
And you don't have to look farther than but then, of course you have then to take it one step further in this iteration, right? What then of the cynicism of the general public, right, towards this, right? Pride Month, or the corporate sponsorship of, or rather, the way actually memes, right? Let's now shift to thinking about memes as unexpected events for the creation of impossibilities. Because memes are always, well, virality, right? I actually have to, Ren loaned me a copy of Spreadable Media by Henry Jenkins, Sam Ford, and Joshua Green. So thinking about the ways in which new memes capture something which previously was impossible. And the ways in which memes die when they are co-opted by certain Twitter accounts.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the one that's just prime in my mind right now is is all of the fervor over Squid Game on Twitter. Right, which has the show itself has a very anti-capitalist message, which then becomes ironic when you have organizations and groups. I mean, it's already ironic or complicated by the fact that it's on Netflix. But besides that, right, you have corporations, you have people, groups or social media accounts representing huge multinational corporations are then like making memes based off of it, right? Because the memes themselves have become so popular that now it's like I don't want to say co-option, but right, it's de-intensifying that social critique by then placing it within the realm of like the social media accounts of these corporations.
It's an interesting circuitry there, isn't it? The way in which Netflix sponsors a show which everybody watches, it becomes zeitgeist, right? A sensation, right? In which, what is a sensation, right? It is a pre-discursive moment or feeling, right? That everybody is in, and upon seeing a certain frame from the show turned into a meme, it really taps into that sensation that everybody shares on a massive scale. And then what you do there is that these institutions then have basically created a phenomenal market space, right? Which they've created desire. They have, by Netflix sponsoring a show, right? And basically they spread their bets, right, through all the shows.
Yep.
The ones that capture people's desire and become zeitgeist create a sort of momentary market space, which then all of the fucking hyena capitalist corporations can then all like after the lion has killed the zebra, all of these other creatures can come, even down to the cockroaches and things, can come and feast a little bit on the carcass, right? Until that meat is dried up and everybody moves on to the next thing. But it's a cycle of attention. And knowing And the more that this cycle happens, the more it crystallizes, and the more with every new cycle, people, institutions have the ability to predict or come up with processes, right, by which when those because the thing is that what becomes viral is always unpredictable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like you were saying before. But if you can control the cycle of unpredictability, then I know that at some point in that there's going to be a spark, and then have ready to go your social media people, whatever, in order to co-opt that spark, right? Then that is how the network of capitalism or capitalisms, right, maintain their control over the unpredictable. Because although the actual event is unpredictable, the circuitry in which that event rises and falls is not. In fact, it's architected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of makes me think, right? Like the event that's impossible that then becomes reified as possible within a capitalist regime, right? I mean, I feel like this is a big part of it. But because memes themselves, right, are part of a network and a history of engagement with mediated products that go beyond the bounds of what creators originally wanted to happen, but then become co-opted by those creators. Anyway, this is a fantastic conversation, but it is 1:08. So we are going to head out for this week on here. Technically, I have office hours, so I should probably just be present and available just in case.
Sure.
But we can continue conversation off stream. But thank you for the one viewer. We love it. And thank you to people who engage in serious play. And we'll be playing more of the Muleniverse next week. See you later.
Bye.